Mark Zuckerberg was in the news today, in part because he essentially put on whiteface while he was trying to use sunscreen, but also because there's a conspiracy theory going around that Mark Zuckerberg and President Trump have this secret deal to somehow get Trump reelected. Now obviously, that's insane, but before we look at the conspiracy theory, let's have a good laugh at Zuckerberg. So recently he was in Hawaii and this picture of him was taken, where you can see that he applied far too much sunscreen on his face. It looks completely ridiculous. And as you might imagine, the internet being what it is, it went viral and he was made fun of, much in the same way that he was made fun of when he drank this glass of water at the congressional hearing. It's basically just a thing that happens to Zuckerberg. But being a billionaire that he is, I'm sure he can handle it. What is more important in my view is this conspiracy theory going around. And that is, as I already mentioned, the idea that Donald Trump and Mark Zuckerberg have some sort of deal between themselves that is mutually beneficial. It's been going around for a few months at this point. George Soros back in February talked about this alleged deal. He said, Mr. Zuckerberg appears to be engaged in some kind of mutual assistance arrangement with Donald Trump that will help him get reelected. And as a result, George Soros called on Facebook to stop accepting any political advertising in 2020 and to remove Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg. Now, what is the evidence he has of this alleged deal? There's not really much of anything. It basically comes down to Facebook being more open about free speech than other companies like Twitter or YouTube. They are less likely to censor President Trump, and as a result, that must mean that they have some sort of deal. They also point to the fact that back in October, President Trump and Mark Zuckerberg had dinner one night, and it was a secret until November, for a month. So the fact they had a somewhat secret dinner must mean they're in cahoots. Now, before we go any further, I do need to highlight, here we have George Soros, one of the most powerful Democrats in the world, openly saying this conspiracy theory and pushing it as if it were true. It astounds me when those on the left ignore conspiracy theories like this one from George Soros, and they highlight the most absurd conspiracies by people like Alex Jones. Obviously, he does say things that are complete nonsense, but he's nowhere near the level of George Soros when it comes to power and control in the Republican Party. Now, as I pointed out, this has been speculated for several months, and it wasn't until today that Zuckerberg said this is not a thing. Specifically, he said, speaking to Axios, I've heard this speculation too, so let me be clear. There's no deal of any kind. Actually, the whole idea of a deal is pretty ridiculous. Now, this really won't clear up anything, because those who really believe there's this secret deal are going to say, of course Zuckerberg would deny it because he has every incentive to do so. But the fact of the matter is, there's no evidence to support that there is a deal. I mean, just think about the Russian collusion narrative that we heard for years. But now, it's collusion with Facebook. Russia is no longer the guy they're going after, now it's Facebook. And you can see that in the way all of these companies are now boycotting Facebook. They say it's because Facebook is not moderating their hate speech, which first off, isn't really a thing, legally speaking. But more importantly, they're boycotting Facebook because they don't like Facebook's hands-off approach. Mark Zuckerberg has said that they're trying to be more hands-off, which means more open to free speech on his platform. That obviously doesn't mean you can say or do whatever you want, because that's not true, and there are many conservatives who don't agree with the restrictions that Facebook has currently. But there is no doubt that Facebook is more open to free speech than companies like Twitter or YouTube. And as a result, companies are boycotting them and not putting their advertisements on Facebook in an attempt to somehow change Facebook's rules and regulations. I've had my issues with some things that Zuckerberg and Facebook does generally, but in this case, I at least think Zuckerberg is trying to do the right thing, at least more so than someone like Jack Dorsey at Twitter. So hopefully, Zuckerberg keeps it up and allows free speech on his platform. And he doesn't cave to those who are trying to moderate hate speech, which would basically mean that they get to decide what you can say on Facebook and what you can't. So in conclusion, many on the left have this insane conspiracy theory that President Trump and Mark Zuckerberg are colluding to help him win the 2020 election. And if you believe any of that whatsoever, then maybe you shouldn't vote in 2020 because you're too gullible. Make sure you subscribe before you take off. Leave a comment if you have anything you want to say about all this nonsense with Facebook. And don't forget to leave a like or a dislike, whatever you want to do. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.